Hey guys, I wanted to make a quick video about a setting in World of Warcraft called SpellQueue that a lot of people have heard a lot of misinformation about, and this misinformation unfortunately has caused a lot of disruption to their gameplay and potentially huge losses in DPS or even HPS if you're a healer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break it down, I'm going to show you the setting. Yeah. If you want to know what the setting should be, right off the bat, TLDR, you do not want it to be lower than roughly 200 plus your ping. Ideally, you want it more than that, but 200 plus your ping is a bare minimum, in my opinion. If you have it less than 200 plus your ping, you are probably losing a lot of damage and making your life a lot harder. But, onto the real video. So what is SpellQueue? The idea of SpellQueue is that it's a built-in in-game function. It's an amazing function built to combat like lag, essentially, or ping, and to just make our life easier. SpellQueue is measured from 0 to 400, and it's measured in ms, so milliseconds. And what this ms, like millisecond measurement, stands for, or like represents, is the number of milliseconds before the end of a cast, where you can press a new cast and queue it up. So for example, let's say you have 400 milliseconds, okay? This is a cast bar. Let's imagine this is a cast bar here on my Excel sheet, where this is 0 and it ends at 2 seconds, right? And each interval, each square is like 0.1 seconds, right? So if you have 400 ms, that means that you could press an ability anywhere in the blue area. Let's say this is Fireball, and then you press Scorch for some reason at the blue area. Then the Scorch will like just cast even if you let go of the keyboard, right? If you have 0.1 ms, or sorry, 0.1 seconds or 100 ms, you can only press that over here, right? So let's do this one in like, I don't know, green. And the reason this is important is because we have a limit to how many times we can press our keys as human beings. In my experience, it's typically around 0.2 seconds, even if you're pressing it pretty fast. And this is really important because when you're trying to like just play the game regular casting, you don't want gaps in your rotation, right? But if we're pressing our buttons every 0.2 seconds, then what happens, for example, if you press your button at 1.7 seconds on average, let's say, and then you press it again at 1.9 seconds, because it's every 0.2 seconds, and then you press it again at like 2.1 seconds. If you don't have any spell queue at all, you will have a 0.1 second gap between 2 seconds and 2.1 seconds. If you have 200 spell queue, you will have to press it by 1.9 or you'll have a gap. If you have 400 spell queue, you'll need to press it by 1.7. Now obviously, if you're pressing it every 0.2 seconds, ideally it should be the bare minimum 200 ms, because then the absolute latest you can click it is like, 2 seconds and then 1.8. Yeah. But the higher the better. If you can tolerate it going higher and higher, it's better. And just to give yourself, for me to give you, a visual representation of what this looks like, I'm going to set my lag tolerance to 0. And I'm going to cast, and I want you to watch my cast bar here. I'm spamming my keys. And as you can see, there is a gap between my spell casts, right? Like you see it ends, and then there's like nothing happening, and then there's a gap, right? Because there's always going to be that window in between. Now if I exit combat, and I change my spell queue to 400. Let me just, yeah, it's 400. Now watch to see if there's any gaps. I'm going to be pressing at the same speed. See, there's basically no gaps at all whatsoever, right? As long as you're continuously pressing your buttons, there's not going to be a gap. Maybe the cast bar will show a small like gap sometimes, but this won't be represented in the log. It's just a difference between like server and client side. Now, there's a common misconception about your spell queue. Let me set mine back so I don't forget. I like 250 because 200 plus my ping. There's a common misconception about spell queue where what you'll notice is if you play with really high haste and high spell queue, then what's going to happen is that sometimes you're going to cast spells that you didn't mean to cast. Let's say you're spamming Frostbolt, but then you want a Flurry to go off. So you're spamming Frostbolt and Double Lust. Obviously you're not going to have Double Lust as Frost, but you're spamming Frostbolt and then you press Flurry, but a Frostbolt still went off. And you'll say, I feel like I'm lagging. And some people have caused like they've taken that bit of information and processed it to create like misinformation. And the misinformation is saying that when you queue a spell at 0.4 seconds, that spell is locked in. So if you press a Frostbolt here, and you keep and like you press a Flurry here at 1.9. So let me say Frostbolt and then Flurry. Some people who are misinformed will say that because you put this in the spell queue window, it's locked in and you're gonna cast a Frostbolt no matter what, even though you press a Flurry after. This is incorrect. When you press a different ability during the spell queue window, it will replace any previous ability. So in this example, if you press Frostbolt and then you press Flurry like a half a second or a millisecond later, or 0.2 seconds later, it will replace it. Now, when you try this in game, what you might realize is that sometimes you think you pressed it, but you actually didn't. And a lot of the times that's because there's a small difference between you and the server in terms of like what's actually happened. The server is always slightly ahead in terms of your like casting compared to what you see on your screen. So what might be like 0.1 seconds left on your Frostbolt on your screen will actually be potentially finished on the server side. But you think you pressed it fast enough, but you didn't. And that's kind of where the misinformation has come from. So it's really important to get a grasp of this. Now, as to how to figure out whether your spell queue is too high or too low, like I've already mentioned, we typically press our buttons every 0.2 seconds. There's like a little button presser thing. I'll post it in the description below. Just make sure you like press your buttons normally to test like how fast you press, and just add your ping to that. Very, very important. So if you play with 150 ping and you want it at 200, you need to have it at 350. Okay, not just 200. If you have it at 200 and you have 150 ping, that means you have basically 50 spell queue, which is really, really, really bad. Yeah, and whether you want to find out like, is it too high, is it too low, how do I know? And the answer is fortunately always to just check logs. So if I bring up a log, let me look at over here. So this is like my Magmarax log on fire. And you go to your like cast timeline. And what you want to do is you want to look for gaps in your rotation. Right? Obviously there's going to be gaps with like global cooldowns, but we look at like gaps in the cast time, right? Between spells. So you can see like, oh, this is a pyro. The pyro right after, there's no gap between them, right? They're both 0.291 seconds. And as you'll go through, like, you won't find the gap because my spell queue is good. I've checked this many, many times. Here, maybe it's a different example. 0.693, 0.693. They're queued up, right? If I didn't have good spell queue, there would definitely be gaps. It's always better to err on the side of a higher spell queue than the lower spell queue. Now, how do I know if my spell queue is too much? Your spell queue is too much if you're pressing buttons and unexpected abilities are happening, not in accordance to what you think is supposed to happen compared to what you press. So this sometimes happens to me where like I'll press and I'll be like, why am I casting a pyroblast right now? I pressed Scorch. Or why am I doing this? I pressed that. Right? And I might think that my spell queue is too high, but I'm at the bare minimum, so I know it's just me being slow. But if it was at 400, maybe that'll happen more. It just feels a little clunky to me when it's too high. Ideally, once again, keep it as high as possible. If you've been playing with 400, keep it at 400. But if you've been playing on lower than like the bare minimum, 200 plus your ping, you need to increase it. If you're missing 0.1 seconds every cast, you're missing potentially 10% DPS, which is an insane amount. By default, this is 400. Blizzard has it at 400 by default, but you should check. If you don't want to download advanced interface options, there is a command /dump GetCVar SpellQueueWindow. I'll paste this in the description so you guys can test it. When you paste it, it'll just say 1 equals something, 250 as you can tell from me. And if you want to change it, it's /console SpellQueueWindow X, where X is like the number, so like 300. Oops. But yeah, that's how you change them. And make sure to check. And obviously, once you've changed it, just do the /dump thing again, just so you can figure out if it's actually gone through. Yeah, that's basically it. I hope this has clarified some things. This is a very big thing for things like fire. A lot of people have asked about like the Scorch, Fire Blast, Pyro combo, where like, for example, here I'll try and do it. Let me get this guy below 30%. So my Scorch is crit. Okay, maybe I'll just combust. Like Scorch, Fireblast, Pyro, Pyro, right? Scorch, Fireblast, Pyro, Pyro, and it's always gonna work, right? But the thing is, if your spell queue is too low, this won't work. Because you're not gonna be able to queue the Pyro fast enough. Just to give you an example, I'll set my spell queue. I can only change the spell queue to out of combat, so I need to wait for this combat to end. Let's see if it's gone through. Not yet. Okay, it's gone through. Now I can show you. I'll do Scorch, Fire Blast, Pyro, Pyro, and I'll probably mess it up. See what I mean? This is exactly what happens. Where you end up with like just a heating up and not a hot streak. This is obviously huge for your DPS. Same thing with like Frost, you might miss a Shatter or like a Winter's Chill. Many different examples exist for many different specs, and fundamentally, ultimately, it can result in up to like 10% DPS loss, or even more, right? If you have zero spell queue, you might be even losing 20% of your DPS. Obviously, these are approximations, but you get the gist. If you have 0.2 seconds, like a gap between every single spell you cast, it's going to be really bad. Yeah, I hope this has helped clarify some misinformation out there. If you have any questions or you're not sure, make sure you post in the comments so I can help out. If you're not on Discord, please join. Makes my life easier. It's an amazing resource from what I've heard from people say. I'm very active on it. Yeah. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.